Hi Greg, Tara here. So this is the redo of my PowerPoint presentation for my sport-specific program design for the female rugby player case study. So my format on here is a little bit different than the format that you have. It's just so that you can see it a little bit better on my phone. You couldn't see the old format very well, but it's all still the same information. So starting off with the introduction, so the main point of this is to create an effective program design for an athlete. In this particular situation, it's a 16-year-old female rugby player who's going to be trying out for Victoria's U16 national team. So what the purpose is to do is to create a sport-specific analysis, so finding out as much information about the sport as we can, and then doing an individual task analysis to see how our client does on specific assessments, and then to compare that information to create an effective program design and how I need to create a program to get my client to where she needs to be at the national level. So starting off with a sport-specific program, or a sport-specific task analysis, I'm going to go through a time motion analysis, physiological tests and performances, physiological priorities of that specific sport, and then injuries that are something to be concerned about within the sport. So starting off with the time motion analysis. So the study that I found, they did a study on different movements that were considered low intensity and high intensity, and it was compared between forwards and backs. So our client is a speed back, so our main priority is going to be focusing on the backs and where their where their main activities are in. So some of the activities that they analyzed was locomotion. So they studied standing, walking, jogging, striding, and sprinting. For intensive exertion was ruck, maul, tackle, pack down, scrumming, and lifting. And then discrete activities was kicking and jumping, and they were considered discrete activities because it was less than 1% of any of the activities that happened. So it was a little bit less common, and so they didn't really consider which one did it more. It was how many times it happened. Heart rate analysis. And then I have a chart here that breaks those activities down into low intensity and high intensity. So for the low intensity was standing, walking, and jogging, and high intensity was striding, sprinting, ruck, maul, tackle, pack down, scrumming, and lifting. So the results of the study on which backs or forward performed more of the activity. So for standing, there was no significant difference, both stood the same amount of time. Walking, back spent more total and mean time walking. Jogging, forward spent more total, mean time, and frequency. Where striding and sprinting, back spent more time sprinting and more frequent, which makes sense. They're the ones who push the ball and score for the plays, so they're going to have to be strong sprinters. Lift, pack down, and scrum was only performed by the forwards, which makes sense because that's their main position. They're not really big runners. They're more the ones that try to get the ball and do a lot of the tackling. For kicking, there was no difference. For jumping, forwards had a higher frequency for jumping. And the heart rate analysis showed that forwards had a higher average match heart rate and spent more time above 80% heart rate max. And then the rest to work ratio. So forwards had a higher percent of work and backs had a higher percent of rest. So for our heart rate analysis for the back spent 63% of the match above 80% heart rate, where forwards spent 81% of the match above 80% heart rate max. So even though forwards spent more time at their heart rate max above that 80%, we still have a significant 65% of the game being spent by our backs above 80% heart rate max. So it's still really important that we pay attention to that. So it's still considered really important for our client because, again, we're focusing on a back, not just a forward. So physiological tests and performances that were done, there was the body composition test, which showed that forwards are taller, heavier, they have a greater total fat, lean mass, and a percent body fat, which makes sense because in the activities, they're the ones who are performing a lot more of the mauling and the tackling and the heavy work. So they need to be bigger players, where our back spent a lot more time in sprinting and running. So they're less involved in all the big heavy tackling. Muscular power, So this test was done by the counter movement jump, jump squat, and the drop jump. And this showed that backs scored significantly higher in all three of those tests. Speed test was done by the 5, 10, 20, 30, and 40 meter sprints. And the backs were quicker in all of those assessments. Same thing with our agility 505 test. Backs performed higher in that as well, which makes sense because they're the players that are the quicker players and they need to be a little bit more agile and have that speed, where forwards don't necessarily need speed. And then the endurance capacity was done by the yo-yo test. So both scored relatively close, but the backs did score a little bit higher than what the forwards did, which makes sense because they're they're more the runners and the sprinters, so it makes sense that they would have a little bit higher endurance capacity than the forwards would. So our physiological priorities. So based on the study that I found, our number one priority is going to be anaerobic energy system, as backs spend more time in less than 12 seconds sprinting. So it's very rare do they go over that 12 seconds or even sprint more than 40 meters. So they're using a lot of their ATP system with a slight little bit of anaerobic glycolysis energy, because they don't always get long rest periods. They do get longer rest periods than forwards do, but sometimes they don't get long enough rest periods that their ATP system can recover. So sometimes they have to rely on their anaerobic glycolysis system in order to get the energy that they need. So number 2 is the aerobic metabolism for quick and efficient recovery. So it's important that they have that quick recovery from those high intensity sprints. And then third is muscular strength and power to improve speed and agility. So our injury analysis. So based on the injury analysis, most common injury to happen was head injuries, and they were lacerations. So that was about 55% of injuries occurred to the head. There was the odd concussion, but it's not quite as common. It definitely does happen. It's a high intensity tackle sport, but it's not a high enough percentage that it was mentioned. So the second one was knee injuries, and the most common knee injuries is the medial collateral ligament and ACL tears. And those two injuries accounted for 25% of all severe injuries that happen in the sport. So that's pretty high. And then 13.6 occurred in the thigh, which were hamstring tears and sprains, quad tears and sprains, and contusions. And then 10.5% of injuries occurred in the ankle, and these consisted of sprains and tears as well. So on this chart here, it shows what activity most injuries occurred. So during the tackle phase is when 58% of injuries will occur. And during the open play is when 20% of injuries occur. And then third is during ruck and maul is when 15% of injuries will occur. So our individual analysis. So this is where we looked at the chart that was given to us in our case study, and we compared to find out what is our client's strengths and what is her weaknesses, and then base that off of our task analysis to find out what our training priorities are going to be. So here's the chart that I was given. So here is our client's assessments here. Here's the expectation of where she needs to be at for an average player at stage 2 training, which is where she's supposed to be. And then the expectations at the end of stage 4 for the national team, which is where she'll get to. But she's not quite here. She's training for the stage 2. So where she should be right now. So for the strengths, she has a strength in lower body strength. We found this in the front squat test where she scored 2 kilograms above average. Her upper body power and strength were also considered strengths, and that was shown in the power clean and the bench press. Even though she scored average, she scored on the average score of where she should be on both of these tests, it's still considered a strength because she's not below average. So anything that's below average, we consider it a weakness. Anything that's average or above is considered a strength. So she's exactly where she needs to be on those. For the weakness, weight was considered a weakness because she's 3 kilograms overweight. Her lower body power, which is done in the power snatch and the standing long jump, where she scored 2 kilograms below average, and for the standing long jump was 11 centimeters below average. So definitely need to work on lower body power. Anaerobic power was done in the 40-meter sprint. So during the split times, I was able to actually look and see where her biggest weaknesses are, and it's actually in lactic power and capacity. And this is really important for her role because, like I said earlier, the sprints are usually 12 seconds or within that area anyway, so it's a lot of the ATP pieces system. So it's really important that we're focusing on these two weaknesses where she needs to be the strongest in. And then aerobic endurance was done by the 16-meter run, which was 22 seconds below average. And because in our task analysis, it showed that, I'll go to our physiological priorities. So because in our physiological priorities, we counted aerobic as our second priority, it's really important that she has good endurance capacity. So based on the task analysis and these three main physiological priorities and her weaknesses, I was able to focus it down onto where I would want her to focus, where I want to put the focus in her training. So the first focus is going to be anaerobic capacity. So given it is the most important in rugby, and this is where she scored lower on her 40-meter sprint, this is where primary focus is going to be, is getting her to be quicker, faster, and getting better split times in her lactic capacity and her lactic power. Our second training priority is going to be muscular power. So since muscular power in rugby is used for speed, agility, tackling, passing, catching, running, and sprinting, we can create a program that focuses on maximum effort power using upper and lower body plyometrics and speed resistance training. So the reason that this is second is because this is where she showed the biggest amount of weaknesses in all of the assessments was in muscular power. So this is why we'd want to focus on this second. And then the last one is aerobic metabolism. Although this is considered the second most important in our physiological priorities in rugby, it is not Rhonda's greatest weakness. So it doesn't need to be number one or number two priority, but it's definitely important that she focuses on how to have a better recovery system and how to get that waste out of her body faster when she has those shorter rest periods. So that's why it's the third priority that we need to focus on. So to do this, we're going to focus using the costal target race pace training. So this is to help improve pacing tendencies, so her speed, which is really important, improved lactic clearance, which is also really important. That's the whole purpose of them having good anaerobic metabolism, and to improve her running economy. So this was the training that was the best out of all of the costal trainings to focus on. So for our program design, just to give a quick rundown, our client is able to commit 3 times a week for 75-minute sessions. She's still going to be playing rugby with her high school team for a month between April and May. So she's going to be playing 2 games a week and having 2 practices a week for our first month of training. She's still going to be attending school for 2 more months, and then she has a month where she's not doing anything, and then she leaves for Victoria for the national team. And so it's really important that because in the first month she has so much going on with school and still playing rugby, to create a program that doesn't burn her out or overtrain her. So that's really, really important. So when I go through the training program, the first month is actually really light, and it's, getting her into the movements and getting her into the patterns and building that neurological connection and adaptation. So it's just going to kind of be getting her moving, getting her going, and then in the second month we push her a little harder, and then the last month is where we can really start to push her. So the 3 days a week that she can focus on, so breaking it down, Monday is going to be costal target race pace training. Wednesday is going to be total body plyometric and resisted and assisted speed and agility training. And then Friday is going to be focusing on a lactic peak power training. So for our costal target race pace, intensities are about 110% intensities, intervals up to 10, work for 2 minutes, and then rest for 60 to 90 seconds, and running for about 2 to 4 kilometers for volume. So again, in the first week, we're nice and gentle, nice and easy, doing less intervals, a little less work. And then in the second month, we start to increase the intervals a little bit more, and we're giving her a little bit longer rest, but we're increasing the intensities of the training. So we're teaching her body how to get rid of that waste better and become more and more efficient. And then the last month we push her a little bit harder. So our lactic peak power. So this was the training program that represented the rugby, time analysis, or the time data, as close as possible. So our intervals are between 5 to 10 seconds. So those count as our sprint times where she's pushing the ball. And then rest intervals are between 10 to 30 seconds, which is the average rest period for a back. Is normally they're getting about 20 seconds rest, sometimes less. And then reps are up to 5 and sets are 5 to 8. So this again closely represents the actual game, the actual physical game itself. So for the first month, even though the intensity on here is 85 to 100%, because it's the first month and she has so much going on, I wanted to be a little bit more gentle and a little bit lighter on her. And because she has other training days as well, was to only do 80% intensity. So that's how we're starting it off, and only doing 5-second sprints just to kind of get her going and getting into the movements, and making the training sessions a lot shorter. Even though she has 75 minutes to train, I don't want to push her into those full training sessions, and I would rather focus on stretching or any questions that she has, or getting her more confident, and also doing mental preparation as well, not just physical preparation. So 15-minute training sessions along with other activities such as stretching and stuff was what we'd focus on. And then in the next month, pushing her a little bit harder, increasing the intensities, increasing the intervals to actually represent the game a little bit more, and then adjusting the rest periods, the reps, and the sets. And then in the last month, pushing her harder and more into like the 90, 95, and 100% intensities where she's actually fully pushing herself like the game. So she should be nice and recovered from her season, and now we're able to actually fully train her and push her really hard and mimic the game as close as we possibly can. So for speed and max explosive power training, we're doing plyometrics and speed and agility training. So for the plyometric exercises, I chose lateral medicine ball throws because you can see in the picture, that's the most common pass, or the pass that you will see happening in rugby is the underhand throw. So if we're doing a plyometric program that focuses on this exercise, our client will have stronger passes with more accuracy as well. So that's why that's a main plyometric exercise that we're doing. Burpees with the tuck jump and counter movement jump with the box is to focus on lower body power. So that's why I chose those two exercises, because of that sprinting, and she needs to take off quick and have good acceleration, is why I chose those two exercises. So this is just the training program. Again, for the first month is being a little bit easier with only 50% intensity. Second week getting a little bit harder with the 55% intensity. And then last month, we're going all out with 60% intensities and pushing her harder. So this is for the speed strength training. So this chart here is the anaerobic exercise intensive continuum for speed. So going back to her split times and where her two biggest weaknesses, again, were in lactic power and lactic capacity. So if you look at the training, we want to focus more on speed strength rather than speed endurance, because it's not very often she's hitting her lactic power and lactic capacity. She's more focused in her anaerobic power and capacity. So that's why speed strength training is where our priority needs to be at. So just to give you a rundown of the training program and the requirements for it, is starting off with just a warm-up that's 3 to 5 minutes with just a light jogging, and then doing some dynamic range of motion exercises like knee to chest, straight leg march, lying scorpio, and arm swing. So this will help with the running economy as well, and how to train her body how to be a more efficient runner and actually use the actual proper biomechanics. And then we're going to do runs that are 100% max for 20 yards with 2-minute rest. So this is focusing on the game and representing that 20-yard sprints and pushing. And then lateral hopscotch and lateral ins and outs, so she could be quicker with her foot movement, her agility, her acceleration. And then the zigzag drill is really important for agility. So that's really, really important that they have good agility as well, so that they're avoiding any tackles. So for the conclusion, based on the task analysis and the individual analysis, the 3 training priorities that I chose to focus on was number 1, anaerobic power using the lactic power system, as most backs will spend less than 12 seconds sprinting, or in here it says intensity sprinting is less than 4 seconds, so they're really going fast and hard. And the second training priority was muscular strength and power using plyometric and speed and agility training, so that she can focus on those fast acceleration and sprinting and agility, avoiding getting tackled. And then the third priority was aerobic capacity using the Costal target race pace, which represented the work to rest ratio compared to the actual game. And then that is our 3 months program that we created for our client. And thank you.